Hello, so I wanted to talk about today. We're going to do a different kind of video today. This is going to be mainly talking about the abstract death metal movement that kind of happened in the mid to late 2000s and is still kind of extended into current day. And this is not a genre I am normally drawn to. It's the type of genre that I can get into for a little bit, and then I've kind of I need a palate cleanser because this is a genre where the artists in question have kind of honed in on how to make discordant music, and that is the goal, to make aesthetically discordant music, but they they can't seem to go beyond the basic formula that they've kind of created for themselves on their first records leading into now. One of the greatest culprits of this genre is probably Ulcerate, and this is a band that I did enjoy when I first heard the Of Fracture and Failure record. I liked that they had a different approach to the style. To them, it was unique to them. Now, I think they're 6, 7 albums in, and they have done very little to advance on that formula. They've essentially done, I'm not familiar with the most recent one. I heard that they kind of started doing riffs again. But the first 6 or so records were all pretty interchangeable. And I think it's because of their approach to the guitar, just on a basic level. They've created a musical language, and I will give them credit for that. I do like when a band creates their own musical language, but the physical aspects of their musical language in performance have really limited, I think, what they're capable of. This is a band that I think wants to appear dynamic, and I think they want to get away from contemporary riff styles, but they want to still mimic the idea of dynamics based on either having the instrumentation drop out or going to a cleaner passage here and there, but they are incapable of having riffs that don't have to suck out the distortion in them, have a sense of dynamics in terms of the melodic aspects that construct each riff. You can be dynamic without having it be a parlor trick by just having a clean passage here and a loud passage next. You can be dynamic just based on tonality alone. And that's something that this band has not yet been able to hone, at least until this most recent record, which, as I said, I haven't heard. But the main issue that I have with these kind of bands is the death of the riff, the death of the melody. Bands like Ulcerate, Portal, Phobocosm, all of these bands are way more aesthetic over substance type of bands. And if you want to capture an audience initially, mastering an aesthetic and knowing how to manipulate an aesthetic is an important step. But as I've discussed in this channel before, it seems that people are no longer able to understand or care about the subtext of what a properly well-written death metal song can be. And I don't even know if I can classify what is happening in this subgenre as death metal. It's definitely kind of a different thing. The focus isn't on how the riffs interplay with each other to create a greater whole that really good death metal can do. The focus is more to discombobulate the listener by having a really abrasive aesthetic that kind of doesn't let up. This band, Ulcerate in particular, they're trying to make, I keep seeing the word claustrophobic written in terms of how to describe their sound, and I will agree with that. It's a very stifling, claustrophobic sound, and I'm not going to say whether or not I think that that is a positive after 6 albums of the same sound, but I think that it does make them unique. However, they do need to branch out. I do want to listen to the newest one to see if they have done so. I've heard pretty good things, but I know that hearing good things in a music review really doesn't mean a whole lot. But I have seen this band live, and I have gleaned a little bit off of each record just to kind of get an idea whether or not I'm going to be hearing a progression in what they do, and all of their songs are interchangeable to me. But that's not something that fans of this band care about. They want to hear that grating aesthetic. They want to hear the tonality that is unique to them, out in front and confrontational. And it is confrontational music, but the aspect of being confrontational becomes limited when you don't do anything different within your song, within your album, within your multitude of albums. If you keep going with the same approach, at what point does it become just routine? And when it becomes routine, where is the confrontation? That's the issue I have with Ulcerate. And I have a guitar with me today because I kind of want to showcase how this is a band that has tried to change up how metal sounds, how death metal sounds, black metal, whatever you want to call it, because it is mostly like trem picked, which is more in line with black metal. They're not a black metal band by any means, but the techniques are more rooted in black metal, in that the songs for the most part are consistently tremolo picked. There's not a whole lot in terms of dynamic shifts with the picking patterns, but because of the way they construct their riff stylings, they have kind of inhibited their approach in a way to make the song kind of develop. Like if you're listening to Ulcerate, you're going to be hearing a lot of, I chose one of their guitar tunings. It's a drop B guitar tuning, and they like to anchor like a root note. They like to anchor a power chord root note, and they like to be able to have high strings ringing over the top of it in a discordant way. That minor second, while having their power chord underneath. So what they like to do when they're in this kind of position is they like to bend that root note than that power chord to kind of make it seem even more nauseating sounding while doing the trem picked thing. So you'll hear an Ulcerate passage that kind of sounds like this. And that does sound pretty nasty, and when you're trying to write a metal song, you kind of want to tap into what sounds unappealing. So they've done that. That's a successful thing that they have done, but they did it in 2006. It's 2021, and it's still the same kind of style. So they'll go in between that kind of thing, the minor second, to the one fret away from an octave. So it's still that same kind of interval where it's two notes that are stacked real close together, and they'll anchor that with the power chord too. And when you have that kind of riff styling, you're really kind of trapped in that position, because their goal musically is to have that high picked, that high register clashing against the low. So now they're stuck in this position. So they can move that around. And you can create a song that way if you want to, but at what point do you need a different flavor to your approach? And they haven't really gotten there. The way they get there is by putting in clean passages here and there. And I also looked at some of their guitar tunings from a show. They left their notation out for their song list. They left their song list out with their tunings next to it. And in order to keep this approach, in order to keep this kind of sound and not have it be tiresome, even though to me it is, they have songs in multiple different tunings. So they can have this same approach, but change their pedal tone up. So if they're doing that, they can fake it by making it seem like they have a sense of dynamics by having a guitar in a different tuning come on stage, and then you could have that same style that makes what your band sounds like, but now the tones aren't as exhausting. You don't have that ear fatigue by hearing that same kind of pedal tone over and over. A band that really doesn't understand that is that band Magla, the black metal, like emo kind of band. I listened to a few of their songs, and they don't know how to change key at all. Their whole records are stuck in a key, and that's kind of where they live. But music doesn't have to change keys to be successful. Most contemporary American music doesn't. But if your approach is going to be just straight up abrasive, discordant music, you have to change it up a little bit in order to create a song, in order to create something that resembles motion. And if your whole approach is just that trem-picked like minor chord or minor second interval with shifting bent power chords around it, I really don't think that's a leg to stand on to create one record, let alone 6. And this band, when I first heard them, I was like, oh, that's cool, but they were a band that really disappointed me with the amount of potential that they have and how they kind of squandered it. Once again, I heard the newest record has more of a sense of dynamics in terms of the riff structuring, and I do want to hear that. Haven't had the time to do so, but yeah, 6 records of that is just too much. Another band that kind of is in the same umbrella is Portal, and I had the same kind of experience with Portal. I liked the demos. I liked can't remember what the first record was called, and Ultra. I like that one, but I only like them on a surface level because these bands operate on surface levels. They don't operate from any kind of sense of depth. They just kind of want to shock the audience by the notes that they choose. And Portal especially, they're a band that wants to shock you aesthetically with their imagery, with their artwork, with their presentation live. And you know, that is cool. There's very few metal bands that have a stage presence. You can't say that about Portal. But Portal does need to add more to their repertoire in order to keep going. And I think their last record, they started to kind of understand that, and they went back from 8-string to 6-string standard tune guitars. You could hear more of what's going on. A lot of the selling point of Portal used to be how the records sounded, which were deliberately difficult to listen to. The production was muted in a way where it was more of a vibe and less of a melodic structure. And that is my issue with these kind of bands. It's more vibe and less about melodic structure. And when you do that, what separates your songs from each other? What separates your albums from each other? What separates Portal from Ulcerate? Very little. I would say that Portal has a lot more of a sense of motion to their music because they don't anchor down to a root note and manipulate high strings. And that kind of dynamic, the high piercing chord over the low chord, I understand what you're trying to do with that. You want to make shocking sounding riffs that have what appears to be a huge leap in tonality. But if you take those chords that they're playing high up on the neck and you drop them down an octave or two next to the root note that they're playing, you'll see that they're really just very close together in terms of the interval. They're usually going to be one note apart to create that kind of that really discordant leap in between intervals. When you have one note shy of an octave, either sharp or flat, it's very difficult to listen to. And that's what these kind of bands are capitalizing on. There's a lot more with Portal, and there's a lot more of different chord usage that I hear. I'll hear a lot of this kind of stuff. You're not going to hear that interval at all in Ulcerate. You're going to hear mostly power chords and bent root notes over that high, shocking sounding chord. And a band like Phobocosm, what I hear when I hear that band, it's mostly like very little happening, but still you have just fifths ringing out over that kind of shit. And it really is kind of a plague on the metal genre, that kind of riff styling. And once again, when you're doing that, you're really limiting the amount of movement you have on your neck of the guitar. You're not going to hear a band like Suffocation, whose riffs are all over the place, get into that kind of riff styling because their passages need motion, and you don't hear a whole lot of them sticking to one spot on the neck because they try to tell a different story than these kind of bands do. And a band like Decibel Omega too. They have the same kind of thing going on, where they'll have the low note ringing out while they have that minor second going on. And when you do that, you're really stuck, but because of the root note that you're choosing. Because as soon as you change that, as soon as you try to change your root note, now you're stuck over here. You have to change where, and that might not sound appealing based on what they're trying to do. So I understand they're trying to create this huge leap in dynamics, but by doing so, they're limiting their like tonal palette, because there's only so much you can do when the focus of your riff styling is chord based. Sometimes less is more, and when you hear like most contemporary death metal, you're hearing single note passages or power chord passages, and those have a lot of power to them, and they're hummable. They're timeless. You'll be able to remember melodies that are single note based. You're not going to be able to hum or remember anything that's going on in Ulcerate. I was at an Ulcerate show, I think about 10 years ago, and someone that I didn't know was in the crowd, and they were talking to me, and they were saying like, "Oh, I'm so excited to see this band. This is one of my favorite bands." And I was familiar with their material, so I said to them, "Oh yeah, what's your favorite song? What's your favorite part?" And they were fucking dumbfounded. They could not answer me, and I think that's a problem. So if you're trying to make timeless music, not to say that they are, I think that they're probably really confident in what they're doing. You probably need to give something more concrete as a foundation than just like aesthetic manipulation. And once again, Portal is a little different. You're going to hear a lot more emotion in what they're doing. They like to have dexterous sounding passages that are mostly chromatic. Like you hear that kind of shit in Portal all the time. You're not going to hear that in Ulcerate. So there are differences, but it's only superficially that there are differences. And it's one of those things where I understand why this genre is successful now. It's because we, as an audience, people in general, have lost the ability to understand melody or even care about melody, because now we listen to music in our cars, we listen to music in the background, and we want to hear something that is superficially discordant, because that sounds rebellious, that sounds metal, to hear something that is not contemporary sounding. But if you try to focus on that, if you try to like sit down and like really immerse yourself in what this kind of music is, it's really gonna just let you down. You're gonna get bored of what it is, because what it is it's very little. It really is. And a band like Decibel Omega that started more contemporary sounding and then got involved in this kind of style, I think that their goal was to make really like obtuse music, really stuff that you just cannot grasp. And that's a lofty goal, and I think it's cool. But you can do that while still having some kind of like foundation to anchor your melodic sensibilities. You can have way more of a sense of progression by limiting yourself to single note passages and simple chords that are, or maybe just like simple intervals, like instead of a chord, instead of a full string chord, you have that kind of stuff. You can move that around a lot easier, and you can have much more movement within your passage. But these kind of bands they kind of forget that you can get away with that, and they're stuck. They're stuck by what their fingerings are making them do. So when you're listening to these kind of bands, all the songs get interchangeable. And like I said, I understand what they're trying to do. They're bored of that kind of sound. They needed to do something to set themselves apart. I get it. It's cool. But in the pursuit of doing something that is a little bit more expressive, they've really hindered what they can do on the fretboard, because there's only so much movement you can make now when you're trying to do full string, like full 6-string trem passages. You know, there's not a whole lot you can get away with. So this is a trend that I really hope would kind of get stripped back soon, because it really is very limiting. And I know that this kind of stuff is the future of extreme metal, and people have touted that for a long time. But it's a type of stuff where the more we allow it to be what captivates us, the more bands are going to decide they don't have to write riffs. And riffs are what you need to make timeless music. You need like a concrete passage. You need a sense of melody. Manipulation of the dynamic between a high chord, well, I can't even fucking play guitar, and the low shit, that's like a cheap parlor trick compared to what a legendary like melodic passage can be. So it's one of those things where it's cool for a song, it's cool for a record, but man, making a career based on that, it just doesn't seem like something that should warrant that much exploration, because there really isn't much exploration there. I just don't see how they could put out record after record, stand behind it thinking that this has been a new chapter in their musical journey. What is the most recent record expressing that the last one hasn't? What is the fourth song on this record expressing that the third song hasn't? You know, that's the kind of thought process I want to see in a record. That's the kind of thought process I want to see in a career, because it shows me that they are artists that really need to express something, and that expression matters more than bewildering the audience by dynamic manipulation between jarring high note passages and a bent power chord underneath. You really got to have more. You have to have more if you're going to try to make yourself kind of a household name, I would think. But because we've lost the ability to focus on things as an audience, this kind of stuff gets huge, and it causes the band to continue to put out records that have very little sense of dynamics in them. So what I'm going to do today is I am going to attempt to take a lot of these bands and add riffs to their passages, like add contemporary metal riffs to their passages, because I think that all it would take is a little bit more structuring underneath a lot of their manipulation that they're doing melodically, and then you would end up having something that could probably withstand the test of time. So I'm going to attempt to put a riff down or two against some Ulcerate stuff, some Deathspell Omega stuff. We'll see how it sounds. I'm going to put that as a separate video, but I just kind of wanted to show you guys that as much as you may hear stuff going on in this kind of subgenre of music that sounds like it has this intense grasp of what melodic manipulation is, I really think that there is way less going on in terms of like that kind of understanding of how to express yourself musically than the music itself is letting on. This band in particular, Ulcerate, from what I hear, I don't know if this is true, but from what I hear, the material is written by the drummer. The drummer is fantastic. I'm not going to say anything about his skill level. And the music is skilled. Trying to memorize this kind of stuff where there's very little to anchor it down, pretty impressive. But if the music is written from a percussion standpoint first, I understand why it kind of sounds like this. It's the band is about battery. It's about that kind of like suffocation in terms of atmosphere. It doesn't care about anything aside from the claustrophobic notion of hearing this wall of sound that has slight variations in it to try to get you to feel like you're being suffocated. I totally get it. But this could be taken further, and I want to show that in an upcoming video. So stay tuned for that. If you could think of any bands that have this kind of style, that have more in their subtext to what they're doing, please let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys soon.